Hi, and welcome to the Social Angle, a podcast that helps promo pros gain an edge in the social media realm. I'm Vinny, and on this episode, I'm joined by our very own social media producer, Eliza Bage, to talk about stories, what they are, how to create them, and why you should be using them for your business. We'll also be discussing the use of memes as it pertains to the events like Will Smith, Chris Rock, the slap heard around the world this Sunday night. Eliza, welcome to the Social Angle.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've got a lot to unpack today, and I'm
Yes.
really excited to get into this topic. But before we start talking about stories, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself? Introduce
Yep.
yourself for those who don't know who you are, and
hmm
also tell me a little bit about your use of stories.
Okay. Yeah. So I am the new ASI social media producer. I actually have about 3.5 years of social media experience from a Chick-fil-A franchise. And I also did work as a social media manager for the college of business at the university I attended. And honestly, Ryder is what got me started on stories. I didn't touch stories at all from a business perspective. I was like, oh, it doesn't make sense for Chick-fil-A. And then they were like, no, it makes a lot of sense to use. So we talked all about, mapping it out for campaigns, using it for events, and also having our highlights up. So that's what really got me started on stories for business.
So you didn't believe in stories before.
I didn't, if I'm being
Okay.
honest. Yeah, I was like, I don't really know what's the use for it. And then Ryder really instilled that in me and like really taught me how to use it. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And that was a big part of our task is, figuring out our social media stories and our highlights.
Okay. So I know stories started
Yeah.
back with Snapchat. Now, were you a
Yes.
user of Snapchat?
Oh yeah, yeah. Snapchat was my yeah. I remember I want to say yeah, early high school is when I got Snapchat and I still use Snapchat till this day. And yeah, so even though I used it for a personal like use, I didn't think of it more for a business aspect. Like when I
Right.
started social media marketing, I was like, "Oh, I don't really know what to use my
Right.
stories for." So, yeah, I mean, I use stories personally, but not for I would say not until, like, the last 2 years is when I
Okay.
really started to get into it, so,
Okay, so
yeah.
I ran a poll on our Twitter page, and I asked, "Do you use stories, the stories feature of social media for your business?"
Mhm.
Example: Instagram stories. So here is how the results came back,
Okay.
and I think this is going to be shocking to some, maybe not so shocking to others, like myself, who don't use stories personally,
Mhm.
and I have trouble accepting stories as a viable strategy plan for your business, and that's what we're going to get into
Mhm.
in a second. But here are the results from that poll. 16% of people said yes, they use stories all the time. Um, Almost 30% said occasionally that they use
Mhm.
stories for their business. 41% overwhelmingly said they never use stories for their business.
Mhm.
And at 12.5%, and I know this is going to shock some people, um, the answer was, what are stories? Meaning they don't
Oh.
know what stories are. And believe me, that's completely acceptable because there are a lot of
Mhm.
people who are, new to the social media game.
Right.
And that's really why we do this podcast. And I want to start to kind of open that up and drop the knowledge on what stories are. And that's going to be my first question for you. Can you
Mhm.
give us a quick explanation of what a social media story is and why they are so popular right now?
Yeah, yeah. So like you mentioned, it kind of all started with Snapchat. So Snapchat had their stories that, you put up a quick picture or clip that lasts for 24 hours and then it's gone, poof, gone. So after that, and the trend of like we said, or like I just said, I started using Snapchat in high school. So you have this generation of millennials, Gen Z growing up on Snapchat and using that. So then everybody saw how hot stories was on Snapchat that they started adding it on. So, yeah, stories essentially is either a clip or image that lasts, maybe 15, 30 seconds at most on your or on your story and it goes away after 24 hours.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
what's called ephemeral
It's a
content.
glimpse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it disappears.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think people like myself, those who are in my camp, don't really see much value in something that disappears after
Mhm.
24 hours. Like, what's the purpose of this? And you start asking your questions like, like why would I create content to only have it disappear? And
Yeah.
that's where
Mhm.
my mind is. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is a generational thing. I didn't grow up using
Right.
social media. I learned it, in my professional career. And as a Gen Xer, I don't look at this as a viable form only because it disappears.
Mhm.
Now, you grew up with social media, and I've noticed that this is something that the younger generation seem to embrace. When I talk to younger social media managers, they're all about stories, whereas the
Mhm.
older people who use social media for business are more like me, that they don't
Right.
see the value in that. Now,
Yeah.
why do you see value in something that disappears in 24 hours?
I mean, I see value into it because it gives a kind of a glimpse into the day. It's a teaser. It can, build up anticipation. It can create even FOMO, fear
Right.
of missing out of, if you have an event and you're capturing it on your story and you're showing people, and those who are not there, they're going to probably feel some FOMO about it. So I think that's why stories have gotten so big because at least like when I first started on Snapchat, it was so cool to see what you were doing, and if you weren't there, like where that person was at, you would feel like, oh man, like I want to go there, I want to be there. So yeah, I think it's really cool to give a glimpse into the day or what's going on. I also think stories is really beneficial if you have so much content, you can put it in another area. For example, something that's not as timeless that you can put on your Instagram feed, as like an event flyer, like,
Right.
that being on your Instagram feed, that's not going to last forever. As opposed to you could put it on your story a couple times a week or, 2 weeks before that event, the day before, that kind of thing. That's another place that you could put content on.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's in other words, it's a way to stay top of mind. And
Yeah.
I think that's where the value, if I had to say there was value in a story, it's that. It's
Yeah.
that.
I think that's the best way to describe it, to stay top of mind. Yeah.
Right, because all these networks are pushing stories, the ones that offer it. Uh, they push it very high up in their feeds. Now, if you go to Instagram, you go to Facebook, though, right at the very top, you will
Yeah.
see the stories, and they really want people to click on those.
Hmm.
They put high emphasis on this, and they're encouraging people to take action and look at the stories. So, if you do take the time to create stories, you're going to be put in an optimal spot on social media. So I do like that aspect of it. It gets
Hmm.
preferential treatment in feeds, and I think it's worth looking into if you have the time to do it.
Yeah.
But again, I struggle with the fact that it disappears. It's gone.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about the networks that offer
Yeah. Hmm.
stories. So which platforms?
Also offers stories, and TikTok just recently added stories. So those are all the platforms. Twitter and LinkedIn had stories for a little bit, didn't work out on those platforms. They got rid of that. So for me personally, I believe that stories really work well on Instagram. And the cool thing is, Instagram and Facebook, they're together. That's Meta. You could sync that. And if you post your story onto Instagram, it could automatically be posted onto Facebook. So you don't have to go into each platform. So personally, I like Instagram
Mhm.
as, the best way for a business.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the research that I've done, and from what I see, I have a family who, my wife, my daughter, they use Instagram stories all the time.
Hmm.
That's from a personal perspective, but I also know that from a business perspective, a lot of people in our industry use Instagram stories.
Yeah.
Facebook, to me, I feel like they're just really kind of pushing Facebook stories so much. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
know what the engagement is for a Facebook
Hmm.
story, whether it's low or not. If you can create one piece of content, one story, and push it onto Facebook and Instagram, then it's a no-brainer. Put it in two different
Hmm.
spots. But
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think that that Instagram stories is where it's at now. Twitter dabbled with Fleets,
Yeah.
which is what were their stories, but they got rid of those. And I will say I'm on Twitter a lot, and there are a lot of people that are disappointed by the fact that they removed
Mm.
their stories. So LinkedIn, I'm not sure. I mean, all these platforms are testing the waters with these things. It's
Yeah.
like, does this work for me? Does it not? We're going to try it out. But it seems like most of the networks do offer some form of story.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think if a business, especially in a business in our industry, wants to jump on stories, Instagram is probably the best. I think you're going to get the
Yeah.
most bang for your buck there, but
Mhm.
it's also
Yeah.
like a package deal with Facebook.
Yeah. Mhm.
So this is the $1 million question. Why should businesses? And I think we touched upon that a little bit
Yeah.
with the staying top of mind. But like, if you're a business in this industry, Eliza, like, why would you use stories?
The reason why I would use stories, we have our trade shows, we have all these events coming up, and also just news that isn't always going to stay like, timeless. I'm going to keep saying that word. You guys are going to get tired of it. But a lot of stuff that isn't timeless that, you put it on your Instagram feed and you go back to your profile and you have all these things that are flyers and dates and from years ago, months ago, stuff like that. And it's like that doesn't really look nice if you want to make your Instagram feed aesthetically pleasing
Right,
and also, like I said, timeless. So, yeah, I think Instagram stories is perfect as another form of getting your content out. It's a feature that's there, and if you have a whole bunch of event flyers, you might as well just throw them on your story instead of throwing it all like an overload on your timeline.
right,
So, that's one of the reasons why I would say that, Another way that I like to use it is when I have my social media content all planned out and I get that email like, "Hey, can you please push this today?" And I'm like, I already had a
right,
post that just was just published. Like I don't want to post anything else on Instagram, to kill, cannibalize each other. So what do? I put it on my story, you
right,
know?
right.
So yeah, I think it's just another element that you can get information and content out there. And I personally think, it's there. Why not use it?
Right. So it's another way to
Yeah.
distribute your message, your
Yeah.
event, your content,
Hmm.
and I like that. I think that's really cool. When you think about Facebook, you think about Instagram, you think about posting content, and
Yeah.
if you just posted something, 5 minutes ago, and you have something else, you know, sometimes if you post right on top of what you just did, it seems like you're just it's just too much. Like you don't want to keep posting over stuff. You want to give it a
Yeah,
little bit of time to
exactly.
sort of marinate. But with stories, you have another way to distribute that content.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a great way to put up, event flyers, to talk about an event. If there's any certain news, you can put that on there. You can do a countdown if you have a product launch or if you're opening your business or anything. You could use that, and that can be something that's reoccurring that reminds people, but it's not on your Instagram feed. That can, get old.
Right. And we do have a question from Stacy.
Yeah.
And Stacy, this is a question that we're just about to get into, but she asks,
Mhm.
what's your favorite engagement technique for stories? Poll a question, request for
Mhm.
a DM link. Now, that's going to segue into my question, which is, what's the best kind of content you should be using for stories?
Mhm.
So, Eliza, take it away.
Yeah, well, I honestly like all of the interactive kind of things. I would say personally, I do think the poll is the easiest to use because it's very quick for someone just to say yes or no, or
Right.
just kind of press that button. I think that's really cool. It's neat to go back and see how many people actually engaged with that. I also really love now that Instagram allows you to put a link on your stories. So it's amazing. It kind of like alleviates the pain of not being able to put a link in your caption. So those are my two favorite. But all the other ones I think are really cool. If you're doing like the questions, I definitely would say if you're requesting people to send you questions, you have to be checking back on your Instagram. So
Hmm.
it's still timely. Like don't go the next day and then see all those questions. Be like, oh, now I should post on my story. No, you should kind of check up on those during that day, that kind of thing.
So when did this happen as far as allowing links in stories? Is that something recent?
That's something recent. Yeah, I want to say that was a couple months ago. I just remember randomly just playing around with the stickers because it's always neat to see what they have and seeing links pop up on there. And I was so happy because for a while you had to have a certain amount of followers to be able to access a link, like to have that swipe up on a
Right.
story, which was really annoying because, I think it was like 10,000. And
Okay.
yeah, not every business is going to hit 10,000 followers like that. Especially like at the time when I was really wanting to put links on, I did it for the college business. And I want to say we had like probably 1,000 followers, just our students and stuff like that. So it was a little annoying not being able to post those links. So,
All right, so this leads to one of my next questions. Now, when you're posting links in a story, or you're just posting a story and it disappears
yeah,
in 24 hours, like how can you accurately measure the success of your story? I mean, that to me, I feel like is the big question. Like when something disappears in 24 hours, how do you know how well it did?
right. Yeah. Well, the great thing is, although the stories do disappear, the insights are there. So when you go on your Instagram feed, there is actually an insight button right there on your profile if you have a business profile. And you can click that and it will show you your stories. So even if I posted a story a couple weeks ago, I can go back and look at each story slide. That's what I like to call them, and see how many people viewed it, if there was a sticker or an engagement kind of thing, how many people actually tapped that, if people actually went back to my page after viewing the story, people looked at the link, all that kind of stuff. So the insights are still there, which is great. So that's kind of like what I use as my defense when I mention stories to people. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know it's gone after some time. You could put it on a highlight, but if you don't do that, you could still see the performance of it and how well it did or if it didn't do well.
Now, does this apply to all of the platforms that offer
I
stories?
don't think so. Facebook also has it. I haven't played around with Pinterest or YouTube's stories or even TikTok just yet, but I'm pretty sure that they should have the Insights tab. And if they don't, then they're definitely missing out. And
Okay,
you should go on Instagram and put your stories there so
right.
you can get those insights.
See that, this is great insight into
Mhm.
stories because always felt like when stories disappeared, so did everything else. You'd have to kind of stay on top
Oh,
of it.
no. You can still go back. You can even view it again. It's basically kind of archived in a sense
Okay,
on Instagram. That's the best way I could describe it. So yeah, you can't like it's not still on your story, but it's archived away. You can go view it. You can look at it again. You could see all the insights. You could post it on your highlights if that's another way to kind of alleviate that disappearing kind of thing. So
so Tegan has a great question. She said, "How do you put a link in your story?" That's
oh,
a very good question because I've
okay.
never done this.
Yeah, I can do a quick little. So you would go, here's the Instagram feed. I'm guessing they're asking for Instagram. So that top button where you hit story
Hmm.
right there. Then I'm just going to pick a random image. Okay, there's my image. And the top right, the second one, is this all the stickers and stuff that you can do. I'm so sorry, it's not the perfect way. But when you scroll down, I want to say it is the fourth row in the middle. There's link right there. And you
Okay,
would just click it and you would just paste your link. And then you have a way to customize that link sticker. It doesn't have to just say like the link
sure.
the bit.ly or whatever. It can actually say like click here for yada yada
Oh,
or
okay, I
like that kind
see.
of thing.
So
So
it's
yeah,
like
and then you post it.
it's
It's
like
a
an
sticker.
overlay. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like a sticker.
Yeah, it's a sticker in a sense. So yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
really cool.
you kind of just went through creating a story, but
Yeah.
to what is it difficult to actually create a story, or
Um,
is it simple?
I think personally, I think it's pretty simple. Like if you have a picture or a video, a clip that you want to really post on there, you can just do that. But when I actually sit down and map out my stories for other content, I like to be a little bit more curated and sit there and design it. So I like to use Canva, which is free and it has a bunch of templates, story templates that
Right.
fit the, dimensions and everything that I like to use either for inspiration or I just grab it and I use that template and I switch it around to fit the business. So, yeah, I use Canva a lot. I sit there, I map it out for certain things. Like, if I really want to post about an event, I'll sit there and make multiple slides or, I don't know, any kind of thing. You could sit there and actually be very intentional with your story,
Right.
or you could be pretty like organic with it and just post whatever, like that kind of thing. But yeah, so
Yeah,
oh,
Tegan says she
Canva.
loves Canva, and
Yes,
now
Canva's amazing.
this is going to kind of translate into what we talked about earlier, which was,
Mhm.
is it easy? Is it difficult? It's all relative, right? To me, I feel
Yeah.
like if you take the time to learn something, it's it's probably not going to be as hard as you think it is,
Mhm.
especially to the younger
Yeah.
generation like yourself who grew up with social media, who grew up with phones in their hands, and they know how to do all that stuff, how to
Mhm.
sync up platforms and post one piece of content over multiple networks. That kind of stuff seems to be relatively rudimentary for your generation. Now, speaking for the older generation, the Gen Xers like myself,
Mhm.
this may be a little bit more difficult in creating
Right.
stories. I think people have to be aware that everything has a learning curve. You
Mhm.
have to be willing to go into the learning with knowing that it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
And we talk about Canva, we talk about stories. Integrating the two, making them work for you is as difficult or as easy as you allow it to be. You just have to figure it out. Like, to me, I've been resistant to stories only because in the back of my head it's like it disappears. What's the sense?
Mhm.
How can I get an accurate read on how well it did for me? But there are analytics behind it. I'm more interested now in learning more about it
Mhm.
and doing it for business. Now, again, it all comes down to your willingness to learn and get involved with
Yeah,
the tools
exactly.
available.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, like, just post a random picture with, like, no context or
Right,
anything on your story and expect people to, like, go visit the link in your bio. That's where, maybe add some stickers, add some text in, maybe sit down and get on Canva or whatever editing software you feel comfortable with, and really map out and tell a story with your stories,
right,
that kind of
right.
thing. So, yeah, personally, you know, it's gotten very easy for me. So I would say, yeah, it's easy, but I know to some people there would be definitely a learning curve.
Sure, sure.
Mhm.
So how often should you be posting stories?
Yeah. So I would say at least twice a week you should post your stories. If you have a bunch of like news content or a campaign that you're running, you might be posting a little bit more. I don't think every single day back to back is the best thing to do. Maybe let that breathe for a little bit, but that's the same thing kind of with all of social media. I do think, Instagram, it can get a little annoying if you
Sure.
post too much. So, yeah,
So it lasts for 24 hours, right? So
exactly. Hmm.
so by definition, after 24 hours, you can post another one because that previous one is gone.
Yeah,
But you
exactly.
wouldn't post one like, at 10 a.m. and then 2 p.m., right?
No, I wouldn't. Yeah, unless like, maybe we're covering like an event and it's more like spontaneous and that kind of thing. If you're doing something that's a little bit more curated and planned out, I would wait until that previous story went away to put the next one up because you really want people to focus on that new one that you just posted.
Does the new one overwrite the old one?
It goes right behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes right behind it, and then it also depends on, like, where someone is, I believe, in, like, viewing stories when they're clicking on there, um, like, if they left off at a previous one, but I personally just like to wait until the other one is completely gone. If you really wanna push something, just delete it and put the
Right.
brand new one up, but I don't like having 2 separate stories up at the same time or yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, I mean, this is great advice. 5 times a week, wait for the previous one to expire,
Yeah.
and try out new ones.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you want to post it every day, just wait for the other one expires,
Yeah, and
to make
there's
sure.
really no set, you know, time when you should be doing
Yeah,
stories.
I would say that's the biggest disadvantage is opposed to like, posting and everything. You over time it'll let you know, oh, this is the best time to post,
Okay.
compared to your audience. I still don't really know when's the best
Yeah.
time to post for a story. It really doesn't there's no analytics behind that. And
Yeah.
if there is, I someone send that my way because that'll be
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, there isn't that best time to post. So I would say that is the major disadvantage the story, at least for my side. I know like you're like, oh, it disappears. But
Right.
I would say it sucks not knowing when is the best time to post a
Right.
story.
And I think you just have to experiment. Try different
Exactly.
times. And if you read an article that says this is the best time to post for your business, don't believe it because they don't know what your business is. They don't know who your
Exactly.
clients are, who your users are. It's all relative to who your users are, who you're trying to target when
Hmm.
they're on, and that's something you have to figure out yourself. You have to be
Yep.
able to experiment, try new things, try different times, different content, see how it does. Eventually, you're going to find out, the best time for engagement, the best time for when your users are on, when
Yeah.
they're consuming content. So that's up to you. That's really in your ballpark. You can control that. You can figure that out. Don't read something online that says, "Oh, 9 p.m. on Tuesday night is when most people are on Facebook." Well, uh, most people is a macro number. They're looking at a huge number.
Hmm.
It's about your users. It's about the people you're targeting. So experiment. That's what I can offer for that.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing to do. Even just like, I mentioned how polls, I really like polls, but who knows, maybe your business, they like to DM, they like to
Hmm.
send messages and ask questions. It's all about playing around and seeing what works with your audience and just going from there. It's a lot of trial and error. And, sometimes you might sit there and think you made an amazing story and it just doesn't do well. It just
Right.
flops,
Right.
So, and that's how social media is.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's my life. It's been doing it for a long time, and you're going to fail more often than you succeed, and you just
Exactly.
have to. You don't look at failure as failure. You just look at it as data. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
this didn't work. This is when I thought people were going to be on, but now it's
Exactly.
maybe I try a different time, maybe I try different content, and that's how you refine your strategy plan. That's how you figure out what your users want, when they're on, and what they're going to engage with, and I think
Mhm.
that's important. And it's like, don't look at it as failure ever.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
data. So I did open this question up. Well, it wasn't really a question. I just asked people what they thought about uh, social media stories on Twitter, and I did get some interesting comments from the rideshare company. Um,
Okay.
they wrote, "I think it's a good way to show your audience, here's what I'm doing right now," or
Mhm.
share facts, ask questions, and spark one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
um, Warwick Publishing, which Stacy is in the chat right now. She said she loves the idea because it gives you extra exposure, but feels hard to make a story worth watching, especially for a brand, so people don't just skip to the next. I use them
Mhm.
more to create story highlights so the idea lasts longer than 24 hours. Can you talk a little bit about highlights?
Yeah, yeah, I like highlights a lot, going back to, like I said, Rider is what really got me to be open to stories for, businesses, and one of our main things was we wanted to have certain highlights that lasted for basically a campaign period, so a semester. We wanted, to switch our highlights in the summer to appeal to a different audience, trying to get students to come back in or whatever. So I think highlights is really cool. We talk about how stories disappear, but they don't disappear on your highlight. It's a really cool area to put, like, business updates. Like, for example, when I worked at Chick-fil-A and our hours were changing because of, the pandemic and everything, I kept a highlight up there of business updates, and it would have our flyer that had our time and if we were serving through drive through or in person, that kind of thing. I also used a highlight for brand new food. Like, each campaign that like a new item would come out, I'd have that highlight there. So I think highlights is really cool. You can really use them to match up your social media marketing campaign or just to keep up, if
Right.
you want someone to get an idea of what's going on with your company, what's your company like, who are the people in there, whatever fun thing you want to keep up on your highlight as well, I think is a really cool idea.
So essentially, a highlight is basically a story that is just archived.
Yep, yeah, and that your audience can go over and see,
Okay.
as opposed to all the other ones that are archived away that you could see in insights yourself. This is what the viewer can see.
And is highlights only available for Instagram, or do other networks do that?
I believe for Instagram. I haven't seen it for Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, no, I think it might just be Instagram if I'm
Yeah,
being
and I think
honest.
that makes Instagram
Yeah.
stand out as a favorite
Mhm.
when it comes to stories, because you can archive your stories and turn them into highlights. So I
Exactly.
think that's a huge advantage for Instagram. So when you're creating content for a story, you can say, "Hey, I'm just going to move it over into highlight when it's done." Correct?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And then when someone goes and they're like checking out your company, they're visiting your page, they can also click on your stories and see what's going on. So it's a cool way that if they weren't there for that moment when you posted that story, they could still get a glimpse into what your business is about.
Very cool. And my final user generated content from Jamie Shine, she wrote, "They're useful on Instagram because you can link directly to your website," which we talked about, or a blog or a landing page. I've been able to drive traffic with them on on stories, but ignore them on other sites. So she's basically saying that, you know, driving traffic to your website, it could be a very helpful
Mhm.
use for stories.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think once that link feature was added into it,
Yeah,
I think that is one of the best engagement techniques that you can use. And it also just helps you, kind of see the value of stories if you're, a little hesitant. You
yeah,
could see
because
if it's actually
Instagram doesn't
working.
allow you to post the links in the posts.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but you're now allowed to post links in your stories. So to me, I feel like that is a way to push people to use stories more often.
exactly. Yeah.
Because you have to link, you have to, add a link in your bio that will take you to a link tree. Then it'll push out to
Hmm.
all of your marketing collateral, your website, wherever
Yeah.
you want to push people. But it takes a couple extra clicks. A lot of people are like,
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
playing with that. But if
As
it's in
opposed to a story, it's right there.
it's right there in the story. So there is a huge advantage to Instagram stories, at least in driving traffic to a call to action. So if you're going to get into the stories game, Instagram seems to be the one to get into. Of course, that depends on, is your audience on Instagram? Are they on Facebook?
Hmm.
To me, um, that's an important question. Now, I have to ask you this: if you can do all that on Instagram, so in other words, you can create a link in your story and you're pushing it to Facebook, does it work the same way on Facebook?
I believe so. Yeah, if you're just it goes automatically there. I still like when I go to make a story and if I want it on both Facebook and Instagram, I still go to Instagram just because I think it's a lot more like user friendly, that search bar and everything. Facebook, it's a little weird. I don't know why, but it still generates right on Facebook.
Right.
So it's really cool. Like certain gifts that I know, like I could find on the Instagram, like using that story. I go there as opposed to Facebook because like the gifts are a little different, which is
Right,
like
right,
weird. But yeah, I would still say like yeah, go to Instagram. It's a
right.
lot more user friendly.
Sure,
It looks a little bit more prettier, that kind of thing, and
sure.
it gets generated right there if you just connect your profiles together.
And Tegan adds, yes, I cannot wait to start using links to landing pages,
Yes.
type forms, my website. So to me, I think that is a winning formula. A lot of people have for a long time
Hmm.
lamented the fact that Instagram doesn't allow links in their posts. But now here's a chance to get those links out there without having to add them into your bio.
Yeah.
Um, so Eliza, this has been a great conversation. Stories is something that we hire basically was a big reason why we hired you, because we're not, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
a big story user. We have a lot of social media at
Yes.
ASI,
That
and
was.
we wanted somebody who really knew stories and was
Mhm.
willing to do them and really get into the weeds of doing stories. So before I let you go,
Yes.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. Now, Will Smith's slap heard around the world stole the headlines from the Academy Awards on Sunday, and within 12 hours, the memes were everywhere. What is your opinion about businesses jumping on trending memes like this one?
So, I think it kind of all goes down to knowing your audience. To me, if I see a business doing a meme like that, I crack up. I think it's hilarious. To other people, they might be a little bit more sensitive to the topic. So, I think you really need to know your audience and maybe be a little bit more careful if you know that your audience might not understand it or might not have that same sense of humor. But I think the businesses that are jumping on it and using that, they're it's funny and it's definitely staying on trend with things going on. Like TikTok
Hmm.
is going insane right now with everything
Right,
that happened.
right,
But yeah, you can use it for, certain things. Like, I think you said to me how you saw one that was like Monday and like
right.
me and the smack. So
Yeah,
maybe if you could figure out a way to make it like not just posting it to post it.
right,
I think there's still a way to kind of make it relevant to your business if you're going to try to use a meme. Like,
right,
try to, yeah, don't just post it to post it. But yeah, I think also just knowing your audience is a really important thing because you might think it's like hilarious to you, and then
right.
everybody's commenting saying how awful it is. So I think that goes to say with all memes.
Sure.
It's very,
I
some
mean,
people just don't understand memes at all. So
right, and I think this is
yeah.
one of those that when I woke up on Monday morning, because I didn't watch it, I don't,
Hmm.
I don't. watch the Oscars the way I used to when I was younger. But to me, I had no idea what was going on. But I got up in the morning and I saw that there was nothing but Will Smith and Chris Rock
Yeah.
memes and highlights going on. I was like, "What happened last night?" And then I saw what happened, and I was like, "Oh, we got to jump on this for
Mhm.
social media." But then I thought a little bit more about it and
Yeah.
the sensitive nature of the subject,
Mhm.
um, the storyline surrounding it, the controversy. Like, yes, it was. People thought it was staged. Some people thought it was funny. Others thought it was Will Smith defending his wife.
Yeah.
Most people, I do think it was assault, and it was a whirlwind of things all at once, and I'm like, this could come across poorly if you have an audience that could be sensitive to this.
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
I did something very, very neutral. I just posted uh, the slapping picture, and I said, "Welcome to the birth of a meme," because I knew this was going to take off. So I didn't really
Yeah.
take much of a side or a stance on it.
Yeah, I think that was very neutral and
Yeah, and
smart way.
to me, I mean, the repercussions of this, are still being felt. Like, what's going to happen to Will Smith and Chris Rock, and it's still kind of unfolding, and it's really
Mhm.
unfortunate. Um, but that said, it was something that dominated social media for the good part of 48 hours,
Yeah.
from Monday morning until up till yesterday. It was all over my feed. It was, I mean, I could not get away from Chris Rock and Will Smith.
Yeah.
And for a business not to at least dabble into
Mhm.
that sort of territory would be short sighted. I think
Yeah.
that businesses should have taken a good look at it, made sure that it was right, really kind of come up with, you know, the pros and cons of doing this, and then
Mhm.
whether or not you decide to do it, that's up to you. But it's it reminds me of a couple years ago or a bunch of years ago. I don't know if you were too young to remember the dress. Was it
Oh, yeah.
gold or was it blue or
Mhm.
whatever it was? And then there was um the two sounds. What was it? You couldn't tell what they were saying. One sounded
Yeah.
like, I forget the two words, but those are the types of occurrences and events that happen that well, you would be foolish not to at least
Yeah, I
try
mean,
to
those are
jump onto.
extremely safe too,
Yeah,
as opposed to, the Will Smith situation.
right.
Like, the dress is very, very safe to have played off. I think memes are a great thing. I love memes. I crack up, I send them
Yeah,
to my friends and everything. And whenever I see a business do it, I laugh too. I'm like, okay, I kind of like give props to whoever the
yeah,
social media person is. I was like, okay, like I see like you're trying to appeal to like a younger audience and everything, which is cool. It's just, that sense of also still knowing your audience and that other half of it that might not even understand it, might take offense to it and everything.
right,
So, it's not so like black and white, I
right.
guess I
So
could say.
memes could be a whole different topic we could talk about
Yeah,
another
I
time.
know. We'll get
But
some memes together.
yeah, again, this has been a really great conversation about
Yes.
using stories for your business, and I hope
Hmm.
everyone got a lot out of this.
Yeah.
Now, Eliza, any parting words about stories?
Well, I just hope I convinced everybody to, start making some stories
Yeah,
and creating them and using them, at least test them out. Test them out. The feature's there. Why not? You
right.
know, it's there for social media. Just test it out. So
And
those are my
if
parting words.
anybody wants to get a hold of you, how can they?
Oh yeah, they can email me, at ebage@ASI Central, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's my first name, last name. So
Excellent. All
yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much
Mhm.
for your time today, Eliza.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Bye.
See you next time on the Social Angle.